Welcome to Power to Lie. In today's conflict map, we are examining the Russia-Ukraine war, explain the real board, and what each player wants. Part 1. 1 million casualties. 4 years of war. And in the past 12 months, Russia gained roughly 0.6% of Ukraine's territory. Meanwhile, 60% of Russians say they want peace negotiations. 61% of Ukrainians now say they would accept territorial compromise. So why is this war still happening? Because the map on the news is not the real board. Part 2 follows the money. Ukraine is not an abstract prize. Sevastopol, Russia's only warm-water naval port, located on the Crimean Peninsula. Without it, Russia's Black Sea Fleet loses its home base, and Russia loses its most direct projection of naval power into the Mediterranean. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. Sevastopol is the reason Crimea was never negotiable in Moscow's calculus. The land bridge. Mariupol sits at the center of a corridor connecting Russia's mainland to Crimea along the Azov coast. Before February 2022, that corridor did not exist under Russian control. Holding it means Crimea is no longer an island dependent on the Kerch Bridge. The Black Sea grain corridors. Before the war, Ukraine accounted for roughly 12% of global wheat exports and 15% of global corn exports. Control of the Black Sea coastline is not only a military question. It is leverage over global food prices, leverage that matters in capitals from Cairo to Dhaka and the Donbas. Coal reserves, steel industry, industrial infrastructure built over Soviet decades. Contested, partially occupied, economically significant, and symbolically central to both sides' national narratives, effectively frozen. Russia's net territorial gain from June 2025 to June 2026 was approximately 1427 square miles, roughly 0.6% of Ukraine's total territory. Official position: full restoration of internationally recognized borders, including Crimea and the Donbas. President Zelensky stated publicly in February 2026 that Ukraine would only accept a ceasefire with genuine security guarantees, not a pause that allows Russia to regroup. In 1994, Ukraine surrendered the third-largest nuclear arsenal in the world in exchange for security assurances from the US, UK, and Russia under the Budapest Memorandum. Those assurances promised respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 and invaded in 2022. From Kyiv's perspective, accepting a territorial compromise without binding guarantees does not end the threat. It simply resets the clock. Every government watching that precedent is drawing its own conclusions about what denuclearization agreements are worth. Russian strikes on the energy grid have cut Ukraine's projected 2026 economic growth by approximately 2.5 percentage points. US direct military aid has been suspended. Ukraine now depends heavily on European partners for weapons, ammunition, and financial support. Manpower shortages are documented and severe. The population is exhausted. 61% of Ukrainians now say they would accept territorial compromises to end the war. The official narrative: NATO expansion is an existential threat. Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine require protection. The goal is demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. The concern about NATO expansion is not a post hoc invention of 2022. It is documented in Western diplomatic cables going back to the 1990s. In 2008, then U.S. Ambassador to Russia William Burns sent a cable to Washington warning explicitly that NATO membership for Ukraine would cross Russia's, quote, brightest of red lines. Burns is not a fringe voice. He later became director of the CIA. His 2008 cable, titled "Net Means Net," was not Russian propaganda. It was a senior American diplomat warning his own government about Russian red lines 14 years before the invasion. Whether those concerns justified a full-scale military invasion is a separate question. The territorial objectives align almost perfectly with strategic military logic. Black Sea control, the land bridge to Crimea, a buffer zone deep enough to push NATO infrastructure away from Russia's borders. Estimates of Russian military casualties, killed and wounded combined, are now approximately 1 million. These are estimates. Figures vary significantly across sources, and 60% of Russians now support peace negotiations. Why doesn't it? Here is where the frame shifts. The two countries bleeding in this war are not the only ones moving pieces, and the outside players have one decisive advantage. They don't pay in blood. The United States. Under the Biden administration, the logic was explicit. Support Ukraine enough to prevent Russian victory, without direct U.S. military engagement. The result was a rival power, Russia, absorbing enormous military losses while spending down its reserves, with zero American casualties. Meanwhile, U.S. liquefied natural gas exports to Europe expanded significantly as Russian pipeline gas was cut off. Under the Trump administration, the calculus shifted toward exit. In April 2025, the United States and Ukraine signed a critical minerals deal granting the U.S. long-term access to Ukraine's rare earth elements and critical raw materials. Talks have taken place in Istanbul, the UAE, Switzerland, and Miami. According to the UK House of Commons Library, approximately 90% of a peace framework has been agreed between the parties. The U.S. pushed for a deal to be concluded by June 2026. Europe is not a single actor on this board. Poland and the Baltic states treat this as an existential threat and have held the hardest line on support for Ukraine. Germany, whose industrial model ran on cheap Russian natural gas for a generation, is absorbing structural economic damage. France is pushing for independent European defense capability regardless of how the war ends. Across these divisions, one outcome is consistent. Every major European economy is increasing defense spending at a pace not seen since the Cold War. Europe pays the highest economic price of any outside player, and is responding by spending on security. China signed what it called a no-limits strategic partnership with Russia exactly 20 days before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Bilateral trade between China and Russia grew from $146.9 billion in 2021 to $244.8 billion in 2024. China is the top buyer of discounted Russian oil, purchasing energy that Western sanctions pushed onto the market at reduced prices. The U.S. government has accused China of supplying dual-use microelectronics that are being incorporated into Russian weapons production. China disputes this characterization. Every Western sanction imposed on Russia is a case study for Beijing. Every financial mechanism, every asset freeze, every exclusion from SWIFT, Beijing's analysts are mapping exactly how this would work if applied to China over Taiwan. North Korea signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty with Russia in June 2024, including a mutual defense clause. North Korea has directly supplied Russia with troops, weapons, and ammunition. In return, Pyongyang has reportedly received missile technology and satellite assistance. Iran signed a strategic partnership treaty with Russia in January 2025. Throughout the war, Iran has supplied Russia with Shahed drones and ballistic missiles. In 2026, the United States engaged militarily against Iran. Russia's oil revenues surged. With Iranian oil disrupted and regional energy markets in turmoil, Russia received an estimated $45 billion to $151 billion in additional 2026 budget revenue. That range comes from KSE Institute analysis, cited by the Peterson Institute. The Peterson Institute also reports that Russia has been providing Iran with satellite targeting data on U.S. forces. That claim has not been independently confirmed by this channel from additional primary sources, and should be treated accordingly. But it comes from a credible institution and warrants serious attention. One Ukrainian official at the German Marshall Fund in March 2026 put it this way: Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia. That's all one war. That framing serves Ukrainian interests. It should be noted, the mandatory counterweight. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency assessed in 2026 that there is genuine friction inside this grouping. Mutual distrust. Mostly transactional bilateral deals, rather than a unified command structure. Tension over the fact that neither China nor Russia provided meaningful military support to Iran during its 2026 war. The 90% of a peace framework that is allegedly agreed has been sitting unresolved for months. The 10% that remains is territory. And territory is the entire war. The board is set. But the ones who decide are not always the ones who bleed. In part 2, we follow the money. Who is actually profiting from the war that won't end? The arms contracts, the resource deals, the political careers, the financial flows that make resolution structurally difficult. Not because people are evil, but because the incentives are real. That's Conflict Map for today. If you want to see how political narratives are fact-checked with data, true, false, or framed, is coming soon. And if you want to understand how history explains the present, history behind the lie is also on the way. Subscribe so you don't miss either. Thank you for watching. See you next time.